Story 1. I am a Christian, and I do not support it. Separation of church and state exists for a reason. The same people pushing for it would be absolutely furious if we displayed something from any other religion's holy book in a school. Also, if you want the 10 Commandments in schools but you are against free school lunches, I question how much your Christianity really means to you. Story 2. If they are not willing to also display similar types of things from all other religions, including Satanism, then it is a violation of the Constitution. Story 3. Brought to you by the people who do not want public schools indoctrinating their children. Irony is never apparent to these people. Story 4. Every person who supports this should be required to provide irrefutable proof that they obey all 10 of the rules. Story 5. It's unconstitutional and un-American. This country is founded on the idea that the church and state are separate. It's literally the foundation. I think it reflects the Republican and Christian nationalist desire to rewrite the Constitution to represent their ideological beliefs. I'm sure they will remove or change the separation of church and state to exclude non-Christian religions. Schools for immigrants and minorities would probably resemble the schools Native Americans were forced to attend. Watching them vote on it on a Sabbath was ironic. These aren't Christian-hearted people, but rather power-hungry individuals who will twist biblical words to suit their agenda. Story 6. It is un-American technically, a violation of the Constitution and one of the primary reasons the country was founded. Then again, the current Republican Party is anti-American, so it makes sense. Story 7. I do not think Christians realize that the public's exposure to their religion makes more people oppose Christianity. Efforts like this have the opposite effect of what they intend. This is not an attempt to convert people, but to show that they have power, want power, and are willing to use that power to dominate others. We need to accept that Christianity is a significant threat to humanity. Until we extinguish its harmful influence from the earth, there will be no peace. Story 8. I grew up in the Bible Belt, Dallas area in the 1970s. I do not recall ever seeing the commandments posted. All we had was a giant macrame wall hanging in the cafeteria of the United States, which the students had created as a project. I wonder when things shifted from historical information to religious influence. In the classroom, we did historical jigsaw puzzles as projects, such as Washington crossing the Delaware and the Spirit of 1776. I agree that the commandments should not be posted, as this is undue influence on young, impressionable minds. Story 9. Feels less like faith and more like forcing nostalgia for control, like trying to staple a moral code to a wall and hoping it sticks. Story 10. I am leaning more towards the position that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Story 11. As a non-American, that sounds like typical Bible Belt nonsense to me. It would lead people in Europe to call all of Texas backwards and unintelligent. It is such a shame because Texas, among many other places in the United States, has produced brilliant minds and notable figures over the years. Story 12. If we were going to be dogmatic about something in schools, why could it not at least be the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? Story 13. 100% discrimination and unconstitutional. If they do this, then they must also post every other religion's materials. Anyone can create a religion and demand their materials be posted. Story 14. I am sure this will help all the children in Texas who are affected by school shootings, floods, or extreme winter conditions. Story 15. If you do not want government in your church should not be in government. There is no issue with teaching religious subjects, but they should not be forced on schools. Freedom of religion means freedom from religions a citizen does not want to be affiliated with or forced to endure. I recommend focusing on holding elected officials accountable to follow the 10 Commandments before worrying about them being displayed in public schools. Story 16. It is a distraction from the fact that Donald Trump sexually assaulted children. From the fact that immigration and customs enforcement is rounding up dissidents and placing them in concentration camps. From the fact that our economy is being manipulated by billionaires through tariffs and tax cuts, and by stripping us of health coverage and social security, which will cause harm. At any other time in history, the separation of church and state would be critical. but we are losing the state to oligarchs and dictators. This is just a distraction because they know many people will shift their focus to this battle, which can be fought tomorrow, instead of concentrating on the battles being fought today that will determine the outcome. Story 17. The same people demanding the 10 Commandments in school have no problem with children being harmed in class or with cutting school lunch programs for poor children. Story 18. Unfortunately, Christians are better at preaching free will than allowing it. The irony is that, by their own teachings, Satan wanted to take away free will, so who are they really following? Story 19. Sounds like a clear violation of the separation of church and state. I would appreciate it more if the people who made this law actually followed the 10 Commandments. Story 20. Religion should remain in religious places or places where there is only one religion, such as someone's house. Religion should never be present in public schools. For example, my previous school had many different religious groups, and there were people of various faiths. Story 21. I think that, along with the overall responses in this discussion, it is clear that religion is on its way out, brother. Story 22. From what I have heard, it specifies the font and size of the lettering it must be printed in but not the language. Story 23. Total violation of the separation of church and state. Frankly, I would love to see another religion demand their edicts be displayed. I would love for Texas to be reminded of what America is all about. Story 24. Besides the obvious unconstitutionality of it, I would be that pain in the ass parent and do the following. 1. Say, as a Jewish person, I am offended that it is not posted in the original Hebrew. I would not really be offended, but I would try to get them to post it in Hebrew as well, and then, 2. Find a Muslim friend. They accept the 10 Commandments, but have them request that they be posted in Arabic. 3. Find a Catholic friend to ask for Latin. 4. Find a Buddhist friend and have them request a statue. 5. Definitely put those waving cats in every classroom because they are awesome. 6. After they tire of it all, I hope they take it all down. All of it. Story 25. Tax the church 60% of their money collected through tithing to put directly into funding children's lunches. And take those 10 Commandments and forget them. Story 26. It is obviously unconstitutional, but Republicans have sadly stopped pretending to care about the United States Constitution. Story 27. That is religious oppression. A state religion goes against the fundamental belief of religious freedom. It is not much different from Israel or Iran having state religions. Story 28. Even as a Christian, I do not support it. I support separation of church and state. I also do not understand what putting it up in schools would accomplish. Story 29. It is so gross and anti-American. There is supposed to be a separation of church and state. I am surprised that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is not suing. When Arkansas or another place wanted to put the 10 Commandments on the State House lawn, the Freedom from Religion Foundation sued and demanded that the Satanic Temple be allowed to put their tenets on the State House lawn too. So the state decided they did not want religious displays at the State House. Story 30. Blatant violation of the separation of church and state. However, it would not surprise me if the case goes to the Supreme Court of the United States and they find some unreasonable way to allow it, like the ceremonial deism justification that allowed "In God We Trust" on currency. Story 31. It is crossing the line between government and religion. Why the 10 Commandments and not those of other religions? Story 32. I thought we were a country of freedom of religion, not forced by law to accept only the right-wing ones. Story 33. That it violates the First Amendment, and it violates one of the core principles that the framers and constitutionalists had in mind, separation of church and state. The state has no right to openly favor one religion over another, which includes promoting one in publicly funded institutions. Maybe the best fix to this is to also display the 6 pillars of Islam. Does the Church of Satan not have a similar set of principles that they should display in every classroom? Story 34. If the 10 Commandments have done nothing to curtail the disgusting pedophilia of the church, why should we think they would do any good in the schools? Story 35. I think there will come a point when people need to find ways to hold protests and demonstrations against churches. Story 36. I think it is the height of performative Christianity, a massive First Amendment violation, and the minute that it is struck down in court, Abbott will say, "See how they oppress Christians?" Because that is the only reason to do it. Story 37. I'm a Texas teacher, a Christian, and I oppose it. I want to teach music, not deal with all this nonsense. Many Christians do not realize the slippery slope being proposed. Once it is the Ten Commandments, how long until it is Bible classes, as in Oklahoma? Then you get into issues of theology like salvation doctrine and end-time study. Suddenly certain denominations are excluded at the expense of others. When religious preferences hurt those left out, they will feel differently about the whole matter. It is better to keep the state out of it. This all sounds familiar, like something that could have led persecuted groups to leave their homeland and found a new nation. If only we had history to learn from when confronting this issue. Story 38. Which set of 10 commandments? There is more than one, and few of them agree. Some even have 11. Not to mention that the entire idea is appallingly stupid from the very beginning. Keep your religion out of my face. Story 39. Got my children out of Texas just in time. What an absolute slap in the face to the Constitution. Story 40. Separation of church and state is in the Constitution. The only time the Ten Commandments should be displayed in a public school is when students are being taught about the history and social importance of the religion. Public school is not the place for practicing religion, and it never should be. Story 41. If it did not produce good Christians when posted in church, why would it work in school? There is no reason for it to be posted in public schools. Story 42. Call me crazy, but I would rather not have a book that condones slavery and other evils forced on my children. Come on, folks, it is 2025. Story 43. I think they need to focus on the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. They need to realize that the Sabbath begins every Friday at sundown and lasts for 24 hours. It is not just on Sunday for an hour. All bars, restaurants, shops, and other businesses should close during that period every week. Friday night football games should be moved to another night because playing football on Friday night violates the fourth commandment. However, they will not do any of this because they are hypocrites. Story 44. So, let me get this right. They do not want the government deciding what to tell their children about sex. Except that one may not covet one's neighbor's wife or rear or, presumably, neighbor's wife's rear. Story 45. It is a blatant attack on the First Amendment. Unfortunately, our Constitution does not matter anymore. Story 46. I hope it is posted in all government offices as well. Elected officials tend to be the rule breakers. Story 47. Here is the deal for fundamentalists. Keep church out of our schools and we will keep science, facts, and reason out of your churches. That seems like a fair deal. Story 48. Unless they are willing to post texts from all religions, it is a violation of the First Amendment. You have to love Texas Republicans who preach what they do not practice. Story 49. I truly believe that most of the people demanding this have broken many of the commandments multiple times. Organized religion has more hypocrisy than most other organizations combined. Story 50. Maybe Texas should concern itself with more pressing matters, such as having appropriately trained law enforcement to respond to a school shooting, updating their emergency response so that in the event of a natural disaster the public is aware of the risk, and updating their energy infrastructure so they do not have to ask for bailouts when temperatures drop below 40 degrees. Story 51. There are just as many extreme religious types living in or holding power in the United States as in the Middle East. They happen to be mostly white-skinned. Story 52. Completely unconstitutional. Religious groups prey on children because they rely on minds incapable of critical thinking and are especially susceptible to fear and the desire to please adults. Story 53. Cannot imagine you shall not worship strange gods. Will be well received by people of different faiths. Then again, Texans do not really care about people of different faiths. Story 54. I think the people who made that law should follow the 10 Commandments themselves instead of forcing them in schools. Story 55. It is a clear constitutional violation. The only bright spot is knowing that children will reject anything pushed at them too hard. They should still take it to court. Story 56. That is nothing. Explore how Texas controls what is included in textbooks. I did a thesis on this topic, and it is absolutely astounding. Story 57. It is better to display the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but that might mean children grow up knowing something about the country. Displaying the Ten Commandments goes against the separation of church and state. Story 58. It blatantly violates the First Amendment Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from establishing or endorsing a religion. Story 59-1. It sounds a lot like the state passed a law respecting the establishment of religion. First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. 2. For people who claim to follow the teachings of the Bible, they certainly do not follow any of the rules. They do seem to use them to oppress others, though. There must be in-groups that the law protects but does not bind, and out-groups that the law binds but does not protect. Story 60. Parents need to opt their children out of any room, class, or activity that includes exposure to religious teachings or beliefs. The Supreme Court of the United States said they can do that. This should create quite a problem for the schools. The state has no right to force any religious belief system on any individual. By the way, the Magna Carta had more influence on the Founding Fathers than the Ten Commandments. Story 61. Waste of money, resources, time, and paperwork, and it will not do any good. Studying the Bible does not stop religious leaders from doing wrong. Why would a law stop children? Why not put that much energy into something proven to be effective like school lunch? Also, it is a clear violation of the Constitution. Story 62. It is another step toward a theocratic, white supremacist, authoritarian dictatorship. Exactly what I would expect from a slave state and the people who live there. Story 63. As a Christian, I think it is wrong. You cannot force your beliefs on someone, and they need to stop acting like the United States is a Christian country. The Bible clearly states it is the responsibility of the parents to instruct their children about the Bible. It is ridiculous that they want to force schools to have it displayed, but they will not even follow it. As an American, it is unconstitutional. Story 64. Regardless of the religious aspect, the excuse Moses was a lawgiver is absurd. About half of the commandments relate to secular law, and virtually all of them are universal across cultures, such as do not steal or do not murder, at least in a general sense. Without these rules, societies could not exist. There is no valid legal value to them beyond a kindergarten level. It is simply religious pandering. Story 65. Was there a recent Supreme Court case that prohibited books about same-sex marriage on the basis that it violates people's free exercise of religion? How is displaying the Ten Commandments not the same for those who do not believe in them? Story 66. It is unconstitutional, exclusionary, and incredibly unwise. Literal evidence that the Second Amendment is the only part of the Constitution they have read, if that. Story 67. Lifelong Christian here. It is absolutely disgusting. Despite what the Republican Party wants, we are not living in a theocracy. Story 68. As a former Christian and now an atheist, I believe it is a waste of time and resources. When I was a Christian, the Ten Commandments display seemed too close to idolatry. It is worshiping the concept, not God. As an atheist, I see it as a violation of the First Amendment and believe it has no place in a public space. There is a time and place for religion. If you are inclined to believe, it is called church. Story 69. I am looking forward to the moment when they say that the content needs to be simplified so children can understand it, and the wording starts changing to suit specific political doctrines. Story 70. If only those who created that law would follow the same commandments, things would be much better in Texas. Story 71. Clearly unconstitutional and deeply hypocritical, given our state leadership, Attorney General Paxton. Story 72. Personally, I feel this violates the separation of church and state and should not be allowed. They singled out one religion to promote. On the other hand, even Christians do not follow the Ten Commandments, so it is just wasted effort. You can break 9 of them and still become president. Story 73. The Supreme Court already ruled on this in 1980. It is definitively unconstitutional, and they would have to overturn this ruling for these state laws to have any force. Given the existing decision, I would think this would automatically render the state statutes invalid, so it is mind-boggling that they are still going ahead and doing it. Story 74. Sadly, this puts that state halfway to Gilead. Now, let's try it with the 5 pillars of Islam and see how that goes. Not to replace, just display them next to the 10 commandments. But if we really want to display something that will have a net positive effect, let's display the 7 steps of the scientific method. Question, research, hypothesis, experiment, data analysis, conclusion, communication. Story 75. It should come with a permanent marker so you can cross off which commandments the current president has grossly violated. Story 76. Absolutely ridiculous. Religion has no place in schools. I also hope the Satanic Temple takes advantage of this law and posts their rules in Texas schools as well. Story 77. If only the supporters were following their commandments, inspiring people with their good hearts and works. Instead, they hope to force compliance with their beliefs. Texas is not that red either. Manipulation of the process has caused this to happen. It is not going to turn out well. Story 78. Fine, and alongside each copy, you also have to paste the 5 precepts in Buddhism, the 10 offers of evolutionary humanism, and George Carlin's 3 abridged rules. 1. Thou shalt always be honest and faithful, especially to the provider of thy intimacy. 2. Thou shalt try real hard not to kill anyone unless, of course, they pray to a different invisible man from the one you pray to. 3. Thou shalt keep thy religion to thyself. Story 79. Texas's education system ranks 40th among states. So, let's distract people from how bad their schools are with book banning and laws that pander to religion but do not actually make students better people or better students. Performative politicking by politicians who only care about power. That is all this is. Story 80. It is a political stunt. The lawmakers know that the Supreme Court of Texas will declare it unconstitutional. They will then use it as ammunition to rally religious people into giving the Republican Party more power, or to make policy changes that reduce funding to public schools in favor of directing students and funding to private schools that can display the 10 commandments in classrooms. This, in turn, ensures that the lawmakers receive more money from donations from private schools. Story 81. The parties responsible for that law need to be monitored to ensure that they are following the commandments and not just telling everyone else to. Story 82. You mean the law they call the vote for on the Sabbath, which working on is a violation of the 4th commandment. It seems like they should have read it first. Story 83. Which 10 commandments? They differ slightly between Catholics and Protestants, and those small differences have caused years of conflict. Story 84. Cultists joining a cult. It is not as if religion being inserted into government has ever led to negative outcomes such as wars or conflicts. Story 85. I think it will not help their test scores very much, or feed their hungry children, or do anything else meaningful. Story 86. I am a Christian and I think it is nonsense. Requiring it will not make people more Christian, and it violates the First Amendment, in my opinion. This was either done as a solution looking for a problem or simply to oppose the liberals. Either way, it is unwise. Story 87. I am generally conservative, but I am a constitutionalist first and foremost. I am completely against this. If they want something like this, then it should be the Bill of Rights. Period. And no, not the 10 Commandments or the tenets of all other religions either. There is a separation of church and state. Our founding documents ensured that for many reasons. It does not matter which church. It is all churches, all religions. It creates a slippery slope which many governments have gone down multiple times. Because if you open the door to that connection, the religion in charge tends to change as leaders and voters change. The religion you fought to put into power may not be the religion in power tomorrow. Or the religion itself may change. Then we have religious leaders making decisions, not elected officials. The elected officials are bad enough, but to have it in a courtroom is just frustrating. Justice is supposed to be blind. We can argue all day about the justice system, but I work in it and I can tell you frankly, it is a very good system compared to the rest of the world. It does constantly, albeit slowly, evolve to be better. We have great systems in place to allow it to evolve and change. To put the commandments in is de-evolving. It is going backward. Justice is no longer blind because then it is based on religious concepts and not the law. Story 88. I think it is wrong and a violation of your rights. It is not for the government to tell you what religion you should follow. Story 89. How else are we going to keep second graders from committing harmful behavior? Will somebody please think of the children? Story 90. No. The United States is not a Christian nation. Separation of church and state. The Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Story 91. I believe in the separation of church and state. The Ten Commandments have no place in public schools. You can attend church for that type of spiritual education. Story 92. Only 2 of the 10 commandments prohibit actions that are illegal in our legal system: murder and stealing, so they are not very relevant in a public school setting. Story 93. As a kid in the 1980s, my mom enrolled me in a Christian school in 5th grade. We weren't in a great part of Dallas. Mom thought it might be a good idea. It didn't take long for the ridiculous and corny religious activities to wear on my mom's nerves. Everything from constantly asking for donations to burning rock albums during assembly. It soon became obvious the pastor and principal was essentially a wannabe televangelist. This is what you're facing if this continues unchecked. It isn't pretty. Many hours were wasted focusing on religion, with special guest preachers giving long sermons in the middle of the school day twice a week. One day, I just left, walking to my older sister's workplace about 3 blocks away. My mom put me back in public school the next day, with no questions asked. Imagine not having a public school to fall back on. Story 94. I think all of the 8-year-olds who see that document hanging in a corner behind a bookshelf will not care. I mean, stop school shootings? No. Cut down on drugs in schools? No. Go after child molesters? No. Show you are a good Christian by hanging a Jewish document somewhere? Sign me up. Story 95. I think members of the Republican Party love to scream about how much they love the Constitution and then use it disrespectfully at the first chance they get. Story 96. On its own, I find it concerning. But the blatant disregard for the First Amendment this represents turns from concern to worry. They will not stop here. Christian nationalism never stops with petty bills like this. They are testing the waters, and the deep end is total Christian supremacy. Story 97. Remove that misinformation from public schools. If parents want their children to receive a Christian education, they can attend Sunday school. Story 98. It is all nonsense. The children, for the most part, will ignore it anyway and worry about the things children worry about. Story 99. Just one more reason to be ashamed of Texas. They took the clown crown from Florida years ago and are not giving it back anytime soon. Story 100. It is absolutely foolish. I am a committed Lutheran and a retired lay minister, and I believe it is completely unwise. European countries with state churches, chapel as part of the school day, and mandatory religious education classes have church attendance rates below 10% of their populations. How is that mandatory religiosity working for everyone there? Story 101. I still do not know which version of the 10 Commandments they have to put in schools. There are 2 versions, one in Exodus and one in Deuteronomy, and they are slightly different from each other. Then there is the Samaritan version and the Dead Sea Scrolls variants, not to mention the hundreds of different translations. Additionally, within the 10 Commandments, there are about 15 actual commandments, and the 10 we are familiar with are just paraphrases. Story 102. I think we should mandate the teaching of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny as well as Groundhog's Day. Story 103. This feels like a violation of the Establishment Clause and the Bill of Rights First Amendment. Story 104. I do not like it, mainly because those who are requiring it would be very upset if a Muslim or Buddhist were to put their own laws on public display. Story 105. Illegal. If they want to make it legal, they should also post something similar from other religions. I think that is a very good idea. It would show how similar religions are and give people insight into how others think. Story 106. As a Texan with children in the school system, I think it is wrong. I do not want Christianity or any religion forced upon my children. Story 107. If conservatives put this much effort into supporting them rather than imposing their views on everyone, Texas would not be such a difficult place. Story 108. Well, aside from breaking the principle of separation of church and state, it is just political theater for the Christian right. It serves no purpose. 1. The commandments are known by every Christian, Muslim, and Jew, as well as most other people in America. Having them on the wall in the classroom does not add anything. 2. The 10 Commandments are irrelevant to non-religious people or those following non-Abrahamic religions. Having them on a wall in the classroom does not make them more relevant. 3. Because the commandments are either well-known or irrelevant depending on the student's beliefs, having the commandments on the wall is not going to make students more or less likely to break them. There are only a couple that children could consciously break anyway. It is an action with no outcome because no thought was put into it. The Christian right believe their values, beliefs, and identity are under threat, so they probably saw this as a bold counterstrike, reestablishing Christian authority. But the commandments are the same in Islam and Judaism, so only Christians might see it as an expression of Christianity specifically. They probably imagined it would unsettle people of other religions, but it will not. Some people became upset by an imaginary threat, so it is no wonder that their fears are quelled by legislation with an imaginary outcome. Story 109. It is ridiculous, and I am saying this as a follower of Christ. 1. Posting them is another violation of the separation between church and state. 2. If the people posting then were as Christian as they pretended, they would know their own theology states the whole point of Jesus coming was because those commandments were impossible to follow because people still sin in their hearts. They would be better off posting the Beatitudes if they must post religious things. 3. It is xenophobic toward other religions, which goes against the welcoming of all messages in the New Testament. 4. They will just cause awkward questions for teachers, such as, what is adultery? Honestly, the more they insist on things like this, the less I feel they have actually bothered to read the Gospels. Story 110. The people calling the loudest for the 10 Commandments in schools are the ones least likely to follow them. Story 111. Which 10 Commandments? The ones Allah wrote, the ones the Pastafarians say were handed down by the flying spaghetti monster? Or the ones Moses received from a burning bush? Story 112. Any politician who voted for such a repulsive law should be permanently banned from holding public office. Story 113. Donald's longtime friend Ghislaine has been treated very badly. She is a victim of unfair treatment. All she did was engage with underage girls employed at Mar-a-Lago and train them as Epstein's sex slaves. Donald will definitely pardon Maxwell. Vote Christian Party. Story 114. It is not just that the 10 Commandments must be displayed. It is also that no other similar religious documents may be displayed, neither from Christianity nor from any other religion. I find that the most insidious part. On the other hand, that should make it easier if, for example, a Mormon teacher wants to put up the 13 Articles of Faith and cannot. That should be an easy lawsuit. Story 115. Religion has no place in public education, nor should it have a place in government. We are not a Christian nation. We are a nation built on the idea of religious freedom or freedom from religion, and the Christian right should remember that. If I were a student in Texas, I would hang the 7 tenets of Satanism too. You hang yours, I get to hang mine. Story 116. They can display the 10 Commandments in religious schools, but they should keep them out of public schools unless they also display the teachings of all other religions practiced in this nation. Story 117. This should allow all other religions to display their tenets as well, especially the followers of Satan. Satan is an integral part of the Bible, and his perspective should be presented too. Story 118. Why should the 10 Commandments be displayed just because somebody said it is a religious book? Not everybody agrees with religion, and why does the Bible have so many different churches, such as Protestant and Catholic? They do not get along because they all interpret the Bible differently. This makes no sense. Story 119. Post the tenets of every other religion as well, then we will have parity. Also include every philosophy that has ever been advanced and every scientific truth ever proven. Story 120. Performative and wasteful, soon to be struck down in court. Or maybe not struck down because the judiciary has become filled with conservative activists. Story 121. Why do these Pharisees never insist on displaying the Sermon on the Mount? They probably do not like the love thy neighbor part. Story 122. It is an excuse to promote hateful behavior and to legally harass and discriminate against whomever they want. Story 123. Religious teaching does not belong in schools unless the school is run by a church. Regular schools should be free from religion, just like government institutions. Story 124. I think they should change the state name to Texas. They are already the most backward state in the union in every other way. Story 125. Arkansas is doing the same thing. They are going to be very upset when they have to start displaying all of the other important rules on the walls. Story 126. You cannot legislate morality. There needs to be a separation of church and state, and people need to be free to practice their beliefs. Story 127. I think public schools should receive half of the donations from all churches within 50 miles of a public school. This should be mandatory. It would also help fund better schools where Republican leadership has failed. Story 128. Only if the primary scriptures from all other religions are displayed on the walls as well. They are all false, but at least be fair about it. Otherwise, no. Story 129. I do not care. The entire country knows that white nationalists and evangelicals are indoctrinating children. Their success rate will not be good in the long run. I was raised Catholic and I am an atheist. Story 130. I am Christian, have been my whole life, and am attending a Christian college. Still, I think this law is unwise and harmful. Separation of church and state is one of my favorite principles about the country, and eroding it will ultimately hurt Christians as well as everyone else. Posting the 10 Commandments is not terribly egregious in my opinion, but if this is allowed to happen, it could pave the way for more and worse consequences for what should be a secular public school system. Story 131. It is hypocritical. The vast majority of those who support this action are also the people who say that voluntarily wearing a rainbow pin is indoctrination. It is against the Constitution anyway. Story 132. No way. We have the separation of church and state in this country. If you want your children to be Christians, then raise them in a Christian household. Story 133. Just more attempts at indoctrinating children into a system of oppression for children and women. No surprise from Texas. Story 134. I think it is unconstitutional. They want to start something and have it end up with the Supreme Court since 6 of the 9 justices would let them get away with it. Story 135. The 10th commandment also says not to covet your neighbor's slave. If people were honest about what the 10 commandments say, I would feel better about it. The problem with posting Bible verses in schools is that a child might pick up the Bible and read all the horrific things found inside. God ordering his people to kill babies. God telling David he is going to have his wives violated as punishment. If you see a girl while you are at war, you can capture her, take her home, and make her your concubine. It is a horrific book and should be kept away from schools and children. Story 136. It is very hypocritical to mandate this when they do not follow the rules from the top down. They are rapists, adulterers, and thieves, and that is just the president. Story 137. When was the last time a motivational poster at work had any measurable effect on you? You give them a quick look when they are new. After that, they are just there. Story 138. As a Republican, a rather moderate one, I feel like this is infringing on the rights of non-Christian students and is a solid way to turn the youth away from God. Story 139. I am a Christian. There should be a separation between church and state. It is sad that this kind of thing is done in the name of Christianity, which gives the entire religion a bad reputation and turns people away from it automatically. Story 140. Kurt Vonnegut talked about this in his dry and funny way. He ultimately suggested that, rather than the 10 Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount be posted. I have not read the passage in a long time, but you could probably look it up online. It is a worthwhile read. Story 141. The Ten Commandments do not belong in a classroom except as part of a discussion on religion, along with other religions being represented as well. Story 142. It is in blatant disregard of the Constitution. Absolutely unacceptable. The only possible upside is that if children see them posted every day, maybe it will drive home how hypocritical the Christians in their lives really are. Story 143. I do not think we should be teaching children religion at such a young age. Public schools are supposed to be free from this. Story 144. Do you remember not long ago when the big headline on Fox News and the trendiest buzzword regarding education was indoctrination? Or how about the fact that 80% of the governing body of Texas would fail 80% of those commandments? Texas Representative James Tallarico, a man deeply devoted to both his public service and his faith, but strongly advocating the separation of church and state, opposed this as forcing faith upon children who may not even be Christian. He believes faith should be taught at home, not by the state. I feel the same. This is proselytizing. A captive audience of innocent children, dictated by bullies who have weaponized Christianity but follow none of his teachings. Story 145. It is unproductive when Republicans focus on issues that are not meaningful. They discuss 80-20 issues and then place themselves in the 20% side of a self-created problem. Story 146. I think it would only be acceptable if they also post Satan's commandments and any Muslim rules they have as well. Otherwise, keep all religions out of public schools. Story 147. It is blatantly illegal and executed by Christian fascists. Every person who approved it should be imprisoned. Story 148. A teacher who is already considering quitting should display a representation of every major religion in their classroom, get fired, and take the case to the Supreme Court. Let them argue whether one can be allowed and not the others. Story 149. It makes me realize that I made the right choice in not starting a family because others want to impose their belief system on students in public schools. Story 150. I think it shows that the country we had before is dead. We are stumbling our way into a theocracy that is gutting education. Story 151. I would be tempted to cut out small photos of politicians and tape them next to the commandments they have broken. Story 152. Okay, as long as they annotate the seventh commandment with a list of all the Texas politicians who have violated it. Story 153. I come from India and have been living in Texas for over 30 years. In India, religion was part of schools in some form, but I don't remember it because kids generally do not pay attention to such things. In Texas, unless the government requires children to study the Ten Commandments, they will likely just notice plaques on the walls and remember them simply as decorations. On the other hand, if children are required to learn the Ten Commandments, I believe that is unreasonable and may violate certain laws. Story 154. There are some important theological questions about the Ten Commandments that should be answered. Which ones? There are multiple passages about the Ten Commandments, and each set is a little different. Which numbering? Jewish people, Catholics, and Protestants all number them differently. What are the criteria for prioritizing one translation over the others? Louisiana amusingly sidestepped these thorny theological issues and used the Ten Commandments produced by the Fraternal Order of Eagles as promotion for the movie The Ten Commandments. It is as if they were not really concerned with religion at all for some strange reason. Personally, I think Pastafarianism's 8. I'd really rather you didn't, or the Satanic Temple's 7 fundamental tenets are much better than the Ten Commandments. However, even posting them would raise concerns about the state endorsing a particular faith or philosophy over others. Story 155. It is blatantly unconstitutional. The authors of the bill, as well as those who voted for it, should be in prison. Story 156. Hard violation of the Constitution. Maybe they should post the Bill of Rights instead so children can learn why this is unwise. Story 157. The land of the free. There are many things that should be taught in school. This is not one of them. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.